We read in last week's reading that at the age of 99, Avraham was told by God, and at the same time he was circumcised, that he will have a child in a year, when he would be 100 years old. And the Torah says, when it says Vayitzchok, when he was told, he was ecstatic. To do it tzchok, he was happy. It touched him in a very positive way. And a year later, he had the son. And he called the son Yitzchok. Why did he choose the name Yitzchok? She'd say because initially it says when he heard the upcoming exceptional news, it says by Yitzchok, he laughed from happiness. So therefore he was called his son Yitzchok. And throwback to the moment that he was informed. However, Rashi cites the Midrash that the name Yitzchok, it alludes to a number of things. The kuf of Yitzchok, which numerically is 100, is to indicate that Yitzchok was born when Avraham was 100 years old. The Yud, which is the opening letter of Yitzchok, alludes that Avraham was tested with 10 tests. The Tzaddik, the second letter, is to indicate that Sarah Imenu was 90 years old when she gave birth. And the Ches, which is Chok, is to tell us that he was circumcised at the age of 8 days old. So each letter alludes to something very significant. Why was Yitzchok the future patriarch of the Jewish people? To establish the power base of goodness in the world, to counter evil, was because Avraham was able to withstand the challenge of the 10 tests, and he succeeded every one of them. The Ches, he was circumcised on the 8th day. What is the significance of circumcision? As we mentioned many times, that the effect of the tree of knowledge, which is represented by the foreskin, the Jew was given that mitzvah to remove the foreskin to give the Jew the opportunity to have relevance to spirituality. It's to open all spiritual channels. That when you remove that, that's an impediment to spiritual growth. And why does the Jew have that mitzvah? Because if the non-Jew circumcises himself, as we said, it's purely cosmetic. It's something which is external, superficial. But when the Jew was given the mitzvah of circumcision, and Avraham was given this mitzvah at the age of 99, because he himself had advanced to a certain level of spirituality, now he was ready for that special moment. That removal of the outer foreskin will remove the spiritual impediment on his heart to allow him to have relevance to God, to be able to take control of his life totally, the totality of his life, to address his neshama, as we said. Until he was circumcised, he didn't have full control over Ramach, 248 parts of his body. When he was circumcised, he had full control. That means every aspect of his being was now subject to his free choice. and he was able to make the proper choice. Avraham numerically is Rabach. The numerical value of Avraham and 248 is the same numerical value. But the main point is, as we always mention, the Rav Chaim Vital, who was the student of the Arizal, who recorded all his writings, writes in the name of his Rebbe, his teacher, the Arizal, that just as the 248 parts to the human body, the 248 components to the Jewish soul, and the 248 positive commandments which were given to us at Sinai, each positive commandment corresponds to one component to spiritualize that component of the soul. And therefore, this gives the Jew relevance to eternity and to spiritual growth. The foreskin has to be removed. The external foreskin has to be removed. That's called the covering. And when you remove the external, it impacts that you remove the inner covering. It's referred to as Orlas Halev, the covering of the heart, which directly has to do with the soul. And when you remove the internal covering, which has to do with our emotion, our desires, now the Jew has full control to be able to meet the challenge of free choice on 248 levels, that every component of the soul now could be spiritualized because the Jew has control. And that's Avraham. Avraham represents the full control. It corresponds to the 248 parts of the body, which ultimately correspond to the 248 parts, components of the soul. That was the idea. When did Avram become the patriarch of the Jewish people? A patriarch is only a patriarch if he fathers the Jewish people. Until Yitzchak was born, Avram did not assume the status of patriarch. Although Sarah conceived the future patriarch, which was Yitzchak, who was the successor of his father, but to be able to actualize that reality of patriarch only came about when Avraham was 100 years old, when Yitzchak was born. We find the Torah tells us multiple times that Avraham was 100 years old when Yitzchak was born. In last week's reading, the Torah tells us that Sarah Imenu, our matriarch, became pregnant from Avram in his elderly years at the time that God had spoken. And Yitzchak was born at that time, a year later. And he called that son Yitzchak. And the Torah tells us Avram circumcised his son Yitzchak at the age of 8 days, as he was commanded by God. And the Torah again mentions Avram ben Ma'as Shana bivoled lo Yitzchak beno. Although it said earlier that if he was able to father the child, that you should conceive at 99. Now he's born, Torah makes it a point, and he was 100 years old when Yitzchak was born. Seems to be superfluous. Initially, when God told him he's going to have a child when he's 100. At the age of 99, the angels informed Sarah, in a year's time, she'll have the son. She's going to be 90, Avram's 100. And then after he's circumcised, the Torah establishes Avram was 100 years old when he fathered Yitzchak, his son. And then Sarimenu makes a statement, Vatomer, Mimile Avram, who would have considered Avram to be so praiseworthy? Mimilel. And Rashi explains the word Milel is numerically is 100. Mimilel Avram. She used the term Mimilel. Who would have considered Avram should be so praiseworthy that Hashem gave him a child and she's able to nurse that child and raise him? So what is the praiseworthiness? She's using a word that numerically is 100. Again, we're getting back to this 100. Avram became the patriarch at 100. Sora says the praiseworthiness is Milel. The word she uses is numerically 100. So I just want to just cap it off here. We spoke about what's the whole idea of 100. We spoke many times and we built it. Let's talk about all the applications of 100. We find a Jew is meant to say 100 blessings every day. And it's alluded to in the Torah that a Jew should say 100 blessings every day. Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Jewish people in the 40th year of his life, Mo Hashem Sholem Imoch. What is God asking of you? Mo. Mo means what? But the word Mo sounds like Meo. What is God asking of you? 100. He wants you should say 100 blessings a day. We've mentioned Moshe Rabbeinu says, Atem adveikim Hashem Elokeichem chaim kulchem hayom. When you cleave to God, you'll be in a living state together. And we mentioned the Balaturim that on the word dveikim, which means to cleave, if you look in the Sefer Torah, the letters have crowns on them. On the letter Kuf, there is, it's called a tag. A tag. It's a crown. So the Balaturim explains what is the significance of that crown on the letter Kuf. Mea brachos b'chol yom, 100 blessings every day. That if you say 100 blessings every day, that's how one cleaves to God. That's the significance of 100. We mentioned the Kli Yakar, that after Avram being away for 36 years from his home, coming back with his family, and he enters into Canaan, and the community which he settles in is Shechem. And the Torah tells us he buys a piece of property, and he pays Meyo Ksita. He pays 100 Ksita. It's a denomination of coin for the property. And after he buys the property for 100 ksita, he builds an altar and brings a sacrifice for God. So the obvious question is, why is it relevant how much he paid for that piece of property? He paid 100 ksita, and he would pay 50. And if it should say he purchased it, is it important for us to know how much he paid for it? But the Torah goes out of its way to tell us the number, what he paid for it. Not that the ksita has any significance, because that happened to be the currency of that location, but it was 100. So we mentioned the name of the Kli Yakar, which is a commentary the Torah explains that the Midrash tells us that Adam, before he ate of the tree of knowledge, his height was from earth to heaven. That was his dimension of being. After he ate of the tree of knowledge, because he had brought evil into his being, he was minimized. And it says in the Midrash that God, Kaviyachol, put his palm on him, and he reduced him to 100 amma. The effect, the consequences of that evil reduced him to 100 amma. So what is the impact of evil? It's represented and signified 100 cubits. In the Beis Hamikdash, in the temple, the wall that separated between the holy and the holy of holies was 100 amah. Why 100 amah? What is the significance of the Beis Hamikdash? It's to atone, to bring sacrifice, to atone for the spiritual shortcomings of the Jewish people that we should reinstate it. So what's the cause of sin? The fruit of the tree of knowledge. How do we rectify that? But how do we counter that? To be worthy of protection, that we should not succumb to sin, we bring sacrifices. What is that represented by? A wall, which is 100 amah, because that's the location of atonement. So that location corresponds and counters the negative effect of the evil of tree of knowledge. That's what he said in the name of the Kli Yakar in his commentary. So he explains that since Yaakov was going to build an altar for the sake of atonement, for the sake of service of God, first he was to sanctify it, to signify it and identify what is this location. This location, he purchased it with 100 ksita. This location is the location which will counter evil. It will atone for evil. So it has to be 100, because the 100 is the counterbalance of the negative of what the tree of knowledge brought about. That's the Kli Yakar. So before he built the altar to serve God, to bring about atonement, and to connect, he consecrated the location to identify it. This represents 100. And that's the significance of knowing the number, what he paid for it. Avraham Avinu is the founding patriarch of the Jewish people. When was he given the mitzvah of circumcision? At the age of 99. Only then, and that's when he had the name changed to Avraham, which is numerically 248. At that time, Sarah was able to conceive from him the future patriarch of the Jewish people, for him to be established as the patriarch, and she the matriarch. When did he become the patriarch? At the age of 100. Why 100? It's just an arbitrary number? No. He became the patriarch because he's establishing God's power base in existence to counter whatever the tree of knowledge represents. That's why it's 100. And what Sari Menu speaks about the praiseworthiness of a husband, mi milel, the word she uses for praiseworthy, numerically is 100. That is the ultimate praiseworthiness that Avraham himself was able to achieve in himself, to be that representation of good, to have the ability to counter evil, and to be God's representation in the world. That's why it's 100. We've mentioned that the Gemara tells us that, quotes a verse in Malachi, which is in prophets. There are two types of tzaddikim. There's a tzaddik which is avodo. There's a tzaddik that serves God, and there's a tzaddik who's referred to as lo avodo. He does not serve him sufficiently. So the Gemara asks, if he's not serving God appropriately, how do we call him? How does he refer to as tzaddik? So it says, no, you cannot compare a tzaddik who reviews his Talmud 100 times to a tzaddik who reviews his Talmud 101 times. 100 that's the standard. The standard is lo avodo. You're maintaining the power base. To supersede that, it's 101 times. If you go beyond the 100, then You've transcended, gone beyond, you're not even subject to evil. It's not only you're countering evil, you've transcended it, you're beyond. That's the true avodah. So it comes out interesting. When you want to cleave to God, how do you cleave to God? 100 blessings every day. That's how you cleave. Once you cleave, then you go beyond the 100. That's like what we call the launching pad. It's 100. To be avodo, it's 101. Once you do the 100, now we're talking about the next. Etch it up one more notch, 101. That's beyond the 100. One is countering, the other is beyond. We say every day in the Psuki de Zimra, we quote a verse from prophets. You are the God who chose Avram. And you took him out of the kiln of Kasdim, the Samto Shmo Avraham. And you placed his name to be Avraham. You're the God who took Avram out of the kiln, the fiery kiln, the Samto Shmo Avraham. And because he went into the kiln and you took him out, he was chosen to be Avraham. Avraham is 248. And what does it say immediately afterwards? The next paragraph. God entered into a covenant with him. For what? To give him the land of the Canaanites. And it mentions the 7 nations of Canaan. Because you entered into a bris with him. Of course, he came out of the kiln and you established him to be Avraham. Therefore, you entered into a bris with him. Due to the kiln, he was worthy of the name change. And the covenant was what? You're giving him the land of Canaan, which is the land of the 7 nations of Canaan. Who are the 7 nations of Canaan? Each of them represents the most extreme level of evil. Because Avram now was established to be the counterforce to evil. When you came out of that kiln, ultimately you were chosen to be Avraham. Avraham represents 100. That's the counterforce. As a result of being the counterforce, now God enters into the covenant and what? And gives you the land of Canaan, the count, whatever those nations represent. The Gemara tells us that kol habod letaher mesayinoso. If you want to purify yourself, God will assist you. Habod letame. If you want to contaminate yourself, if you want to sin post-lo. What does that mean? God has the door open for you. God does not assist you to sin. I'll give you an example. You have a gangplank. The door is open, you walk off that gangplank, you fall into the ocean. You fall 100 stories. A person naturally gravitates towards evil. So therefore, what does that mean? You want to sin, post-lo. God opens the door. It's your choice. It's your innovation. It's your motivation. You want to purify yourself. That's going in the counter direction. You want to counter evil, then you will merit divine assistance. That's Messiah also. For that, you need to resort to God's assistance. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. But how do you merit God's assistance? At first, of course, you have to believe in God. You have to be meritorious. But you have to have a cognizance of him. if you cleave to him, so then being associated, attached to him, you can call on those resources because you're cleaving. And we represent the 100. The Jew has the access to draw within himself of relationships which the world does not have. When we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, the Almighty, our Almighty, God is the God of the world, but the personalization, to be able to have that level of intimacy, attachment, it's only the Jew. Because the Jew represents, is God's power base in existence. And that's why throughout the ages, the Jew has always been confronted with challenges, even total annihilation. Because when evil rears its head, well, there is that opening of vulnerability due to our own shortcomings, because we're not cleaving sufficiently, because what does evil want to do to what the Jew represents? To destroy it. And that's the anti-Semitism. And that's why they succeed, the way they do succeed. Because it's literally, it's a fight for the death. Because ultimately, end of time, what's going to happen? God's going to purge the world, will expunge the world of all evil. If we were sufficiently worthy, we'd be there. We're not there yet. Because we haven't made enough appropriate choices to be there. But when the time comes, Esau, the Edomite kingdom, will be destroyed, will be judged and destroyed. God will be proclaimed the omnipotent being by all humanity, and evil will be purged from existence. There will not be any longer accounted for to us. We'll be the only representation. That's what this is all about. We read about Avraham Avinu. The Talmud tells us, in Sanhedrin, cites a verse that Ibud Rishoim Rino, that when the evil are destroyed, it's song for the tzaddik and song for God. Ibud Rishoim, Ibud means the destruction of Rishoim Rino, Rino's song. When the Jew hears the downfall of the evil, the Jew rejoices. Evil has been put at bay. It's Reno. But yet we have a very difficult story in the Torah. At the time of Avraham Avinu, which community personified evil? Sodom and Amorah. Sodom was the main metropolis of that area, and Amorah. There were 3 other cities, 5 cities. And the Torah tells us they were roim v'chatov l'Hashem Yod. They defied God intentionally. They were evil at the most extreme level. And God brought cosmic destruction upon them, destroyed them, that there's no trace of their existence ever existed. That's the degree of evil they were. There's no remnant of them. And yet, when Avram is told that by God that he will destroy them, he immediately goes and enters into a very serious, fierce dialogue with God. Maybe the 50 tzaddikim among these 5 cities, 10 tzaddikim in each city, and the merit of the 5 devoutly righteous, it should evoke mercy to save these cities. They should not be destroyed. Who is he trying to save? People who are, the Torah tested their classification. Ro'im, they're evil, v'chatom, it's sinning to God defiantly. God says, I will wipe them off the face of the earth. Rabbi says, but why? Maybe in the merit of Tzad Tzadikim, Allow them to continue. That's what your mercy should bring about. So God says, there are no 50 tzaddikim, maybe the 45, until he works it down to 10. And then there's nothing more to say. God destroys them. Okay? But as he's talking to God, he says, maybe I'm speaking out of turn. Maybe I'm speaking too strongly. I only exist only due to your mercy, because I could have been ash, I could have been dust. When I went to war against the 4 kings, if not for your intervention and your miracles, I would have been dust. If not for your intervention, I'd be ash. I would have never come out of the kiln. Where do I have the audacity to speak so directly to you? But he kept going. Avraham did not let up till God says, there's nothing to talk about. There's no remnant of tzaddik there, therefore I will destroy them. But if Ibud Rishon is Reno, if the destruction of evil is song to the tzaddik, and God wants to destroy them, why is Avraham pushing the envelope, so to say? And is giving God such a difficult time and pleading for mercy that they should not be destroyed. Now, we read about Avraham going to war with the 4 mightiest kings. The 4 mightiest kings that had taken Lot, Avram's nephew, captive, with all the members of the stone community. The people with their possessions. And Avram had entered into a covenant with his nephew that if anything should happen to him, he's there to assist him. He's informed that his nephew was taken captive. Immediately goes to war. Now, how does a man, just now a war had taken place, 4 kings against 5 kings. These are the 4 mightiest kings of the world. And Avram, seemingly, due to his zealotry, is going to war against 4 of the mightiest kings in the world. And he wins the war. He's the victor. He had a resort to miracles. And he saved them. He saved Lot and his family, and he saved the whole Sodomite community. All these evil people, he saved them. This king of Sodom comes before Avram, dripping with his arrogance and evil and whatever he represented. And he says to Avram, I mean, he's part of the spoils of war. He's the captive. And he says, he speaks like a victor. He says to Avram, give me the people and you take the spoils. I mean, he's dictating to Avram. Avram's the victor, and he's telling Avram, give me the people and you could have the material spoils. You could have the booty. Avram says to the king of Sodom, I will not take not a thread from you, not a bootstrap from you, because I don't want anybody, you should ever say that you made me wealthy. God promised me wealth, but anybody should say that you, which is the source of evil, caused me to become wealthy. Therefore, I will not take as much as a thread, as much as a bootstrap from you. And that was the end of the conversation. The king of Stone went back with the people, and they continued in the evil ways until finally God said, I've had enough, I'm destroying them. And that's when Avram is being informed that God's going to destroy Sodom. There's a discussion, why did the Jewish people go to Egypt? Why was there a bondage for 210 years? We're in Egypt for 210 years. Why? Why do we deserve this? So one of the reasons given in the Gemara, that when the king of Sodom said to Avram, give me the people, and you take the material spoils, Avram should have said, I'm the victor, I'm taking the people. At that point, Avram could have converted them to monotheism. And ultimately, they wouldn't have evolved into an evil which has to be removed from the earth. So because Avram passed on this opportunity of taking the people and influencing them to become monotheists, God says your children will be slaves in the land, which is not theirs. They'll be afflicted for so many years. That was the punishment to Avraham. As you were not concerned for these people to bring them back to God, I will not be concerned for your children. And what happened to the Jews in Egypt? We became pagans. Only the last year, due to the 10 plagues, revealed miracles, did we come to a moment of understanding that paganism is baseless, and it culminated with the slaughtering of the Paschal lamb, was the deed of the Egyptians, and our circumcision. So why did we go to Egypt? Because God said to Avraham, you should have taken these people and brought them under the wings of the divine presence, and you did not. Avraham says now to Avraham, God says to Avraham, it's over. If it's over, what does that mean? It's etched in stone, the Jews are going to Egypt. If Avraham pleads that case and he does not destroy them, what happens? Avraham still has a chance to actually stay the decree, the Jews are not going to Egypt. Avraham didn't want to leave a stone unturned to try to prevent the Jews going from Egypt. That's why he's entering into this dialogue. Because Avraham believed, although he made the mistake initially, but if he still has a chance to convert them, yeah, he will succeed. And if he succeeds, the Jews are not going to Egypt, because they're only going to Egypt because you passed an opportunity which they're too far gone. So he goes through the whole dialogue, back and forth. God says, it's too late. There aren't even 10 tzaddikim. Therefore, they're all evil. They have to be removed from existence. Cosmic destruction. When that happened, Avraham understood we're at a point of no return. The Jews are going to Egypt. The Jews are going into bondage. The Jews will go and be enslaved and influenced and afflicted by the Egyptians. They're going to become pagans. This is Avraham's worst nightmare. When he said, the no tzaddikim, he had to face the reality of what was coming down the pike, so to say, what was going to happen. But that was Avraham. We find when he entered into dialogue, the Torah uses a term. He approached God, and that term is used when a person goes to war. That word vayigash, he approached him. In terms of the intensity of the dialogue, in terms of the tone that he had used. And that's why he had to excuse himself many times, because he realized he was out of turn the way he was speaking. May have not been appropriate, but he had everything on the line. And because he had everything on the line, therefore he spoke in that context, hopefully to overturn the decree for the destruction of Sodom.